Well, hello again, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are in Anchorage, Alaska, in the DC-6 for Everett's Air Fuel. This flight's going to take us up to Fairbanks, Alaska, and we're going to try to show off some of the features of the DC-6, talk a little about the aircraft itself, and just enjoy the scenery of the Alaskan wilderness as it passes by our cockpit windows. We've got our cargo loaded up already here on the ramp, and we'll go ahead and get things going. This is one of my favorite aircraft, so I hope you enjoyed this video. So without further ado, let's climb aboard. Welcome aboard our DC-6A. This is known as the Aviator. As you notice the little motif of Howard Hughes there. That is actually currently an active aircraft for Everett's Air Fuel. So let's go ahead and go through our pre-flight, pre-start checks. Our cabin attendance temperature control we don't really need to worry about because we're just flying cargo today. Emergency equipment is stowed, hand fire extinguishers are installed. We've checked our circuit breakers already. We can take our battery and ground power on, so let's select that to ground power and ground power on. You see our orange light illuminating there, that indicates that our ground power is connected and working. We'll shed a little bit of light on the subject here and get this instrument lights up just a little bit on our side so we can see what's going on. And perhaps a little bit up here as well. The light switches are just kind of scattered all over the place. In the DC-6 you got some up here, some over here, some over here. It's just kind of haphazard, but that's what you get when you have an airplane built in the late 1940s. Our seat belts, seats, and rudder pedals are adjusted. We don't need our no smoking seatbelt signs again, just carrying cargo. Water injection switches, those are up here. Those are off. Our emergency dice controls for the propeller, those are here, off and guarded. Cow flaps, those can go to open here. Set those to full open for our start. And our fuel booster pump circuit breakers, those are all set. Our fuel booster pump switches are all off. Our inverter switches, all three can come to the on position here. Auxiliary blower is off. Voltage regulator overheat warning light is off. Our generators can come to on, so we'll get all four of those on here. Ignition switches are all turned off. Here, fuel switches are normal, all down there. And system 1 for our ignition. So we're good there. We'll take the cabin heater master on. Our airfoil de-icer master is off. Propeller de-ice is also off. Carburetor de-ice is also off. Check our anti-ice fluid quantities. That will be up here on our overhead. Let's see. There's our anti-ice there. So that is full. Hydraulic fluid. It's just here, so that's full. Fuel quantity, we have around 3,800 gallons in our mains, and we have our alternates are empty, and that should be plenty of fuel to get us up to Fairbanks. It's only about an hour flight up there. Oil quantity, so we've got engines 1 and 2 here, those are full. And engines 3 and 4 also full, as well as our auxiliary oil tank is full. Water quantities, we'll have to top those up. We will be needing a wet takeoff today. Superchargers are in low. Cabin pressure we don't need to worry about today. We're only going up to 9,000 feet. Door warning lights here and here, those are off. All of our doors are closed now. AC voltmeter, set that to engine instruments, and our DC to bus. Fire extinguisher selectors are all in. These here are all the various sections that the CO2 fire extinguishers will discharge to. We'll go ahead and test our fire detection system. Test lights are just up here. We'll test zone 1. Good test there, good lights. So good test on our fire extinguisher system. Cockpit heat, it is a little bit chilly on the ground here. You can see our outside air temperature here, just right about 0 degrees Celsius. So that's about 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Not too bad for Alaska. And this is real weather currently, so we'll go ahead and turn this up just a little bit so we're warm. Just there, we'll set this to 0 to 10 degrees. We need that, that's the anti-ice for the windshield. Clocks and altimeters are set. Our hydraulic system bypass lever, which is here, that is in the down position. Our auxiliary hydraulic pump selector valve, which is here, that is forward, which is where we want it. This is the brake system. Hydraulic system check. Now this one's a little tricky. We have to get to the auxiliary pump, which is here. That switch is a little difficult to get to, so we'll kind of go like this. Get the switch on. And again, it's hard to see, but right over here, just through the co-pilot's yoke, you'll see that dial coming up. And we want to see 2600 to 3050 psi. So just come up to about 3000 psi there on our hydraulic pressure. And if you see just below that, that is our emergency air brake pressure, and that's at 1500 psi. So go ahead and take the auxiliary pump off. Fuel tank selectors, go to main. And crossfeed is off, we won't need that today. Our RPM control lever is all the way forward. Looks like my axis is a little bit messed up there. I'll leave that there. And our engine master controls, which is here on this box. That is set to auto and 3. So basically that means that we're slaving our propeller sync off of the number 3 engine. You can slave it off the number 2 engine as well, just depending on your preference, but we'll slave it off to number 3. Crack the throttles just a little bit while we're here. There we go. Mixtures are set to idle cutoff, parking brake is on, autopilot is off, gyro is off. Our fuel and oil pressure warning switches are all set to on. Landing gear control is down, indicating down. And our trim tabs set there, and set down here. Carburetor air is cold. We'll go ahead and get our radios tuned up here. I'm going to use the GPS today, just to make things easier for us. I usually use old school navigation, but this aircraft does indeed have a GPS installed, so we will do that for the sake of realism today. So that is our pre-start checks. So we'll go ahead and start our engines. We start them in the order of 3, 4, 2, and then 1. So that would be the right-hand inboard to the right-hand outboard to the left-hand inboard to the left-hand outboard engine. So 3, 4, 2, 1. Now, it's not actually that cold today, but if it was a little colder, we might have to worry more about this, but in cold weather, If you don't get your engine to start on the first try, you may not get it to start because, of course, a byproduct of combustion is condensation. And if that condensation freezes in your cylinders, it usually ends up accumulating on the spark plugs, actually. So if that accumulates on the spark plugs and you have icicles there, you're not going to get good spark, obviously. So you really want it to start on the first shot. But again, it's not super cold today. It's only 32 degrees Fahrenheit up here. So we shouldn't have to worry about that. But just something to bear in mind if you're using these old, well, really any piston-powered airplane, but radials especially in extreme weather. Go ahead and get our start selector to the number 3 engine. You got a 1, 2, 3, and 4 on this start selector. That selects which engine you're engaging. Get our boost pump on to low, and we'll just confirm the fuel pressure here. You can see our number 3 gauge here has come up, indicating about 20 psi, which is what we want to see. So then what we'll do is come up here and we'll prime it for about 5 seconds, hit the starter, let it turn over 9 blades, hit the boost, kick the mags on, and once it catches, we'll come down and throw the mixture into auto rich position. That is the procedure that I read about somewhere. I can't remember now where I read it, but we'll go ahead and do that. So prime 1000, 2000, 3000, 1005.
3, 6, 9.
Boost, mags.
12.
There's the catch. Put it in auto rich. And you can see our oil pressure came up there. RPMs are up to around 1000. It will be anyways. That's where we want to be. Give it just a little bit more fuel, keep it running. And we'll come up here and take the booster off. Now what that booster does, in case you didn't know, that actually sends a shower of sparks into the spark plugs to really give it a boost of fire to get it going. And of course the prime is shooting a shot of primer, usually in the top cylinders of the engine. So engine 4, boost pump on. Again, just confirming fuel pressure. Prime it. 1000, 2000, 3000, 1005.
3, 6, 9.
Boost, mags. There's the catch. Throw that in auto rich. Oil pressure has come up on number 4. And we'll give it just a little bit of throttle to keep it running. Engine 3 is idling along nicely at 1000. So we'll go ahead and start 2 and 1, and then we'll come back. Alright, so we got all 4 engines running here, running around 1000 RPM. Good oil pressure. We'll let the oil temps come up here. As we're warming up, we'll do the after start checklists. We will take our booster switches off. Get it into the middle position there. Take those off. Start selector can go to off. Ground power can go to plane battery and ground power off. Oops. Hit the wrong switch there. Remove the ground power there. So as we're warming up, we'll go ahead and get our GPS going here. Let that boot up. It's gonna be a pretty straight shot up there. We've got just a little bit of weather around Anchorage, but that should clear up as we head north to Fairbanks. We're loaded with a total of 15,522 pounds of fuel, and our total gross weight is 88,410 right now. So I mentioned a wet takeoff today. So what that means is we'll be using the water injection, which injects a mixture of methanol and water into the cylinders. Allows you to run them a little bit higher power, get more out of the engines. And the cutoff, the reason we're using that today is because if we're over a gross weight of 87,600 pounds, we will use a wet takeoff. So we'll let everything warm up here, make sure our flight plan is in there, which it is. Our GPS, we'll get that off a V-lock onto the GPS. So maybe once we get our autopilot coming in, it'll engage. And where we're going, I'm going to go ahead and put the Anchorage VOR into nav 1, or nav 2 I should say. That is 113.5. There's that. Switch that over. 135. And then we'll load the Fairbanks VOR into standby, just to give us a reference as we're headed up there. And that is 108.6. 108.6. And we could, if we really wanted to, load an NDB in there. So we have the China NDB, it's close to Fairbanks, 257, just to give us some extra confirmation that we are indeed headed in the right direction. We're still warming up here. While warming up, we'll talk a little bit about the DC-6. DC-6 is just an awesome airplane. It came out in the late 40s. 47, I believe, was the first year it came out onto the line. And they made them until 1958. The DC-6B is the passenger variant, and we are in a DC-6A. I believe this particular one was originally a C-118 for the military, and it was converted to DC-6A configuration later on. We have 4 Pratt & Whitney R2800, and this is the CB16 variant of the R2800. There were versions of the DC-6 that had the CB17 version, and from my understanding that was basically just a change in parts that could be made in the field to allow the engine to run higher octane fuel to get just a little bit more power out of the R2800. And there were some stories I read about, you know, Pratt & Whitney was making engines for the military after the war and getting a lot of power out of the 2800, but they were using military power, war emergency power. The Civil Aeronautics Board, the precursor to the FAA, was not happy about that and didn't want to certify the use of war emergency power on a passenger aircraft. So they went back to Pratt & Whitney and said, no, we can't do that. You need to make it different. So they ended up changing a few things. The water injection does help a lot. It gives you I think it's an extra 250 horsepower, I want to say. And as I mentioned, it's a water methanol injection that really, it just provides cooling to the cylinders and prevents detonation. If your cylinder gets too hot, the fuel air mixture isn't going to burn clean. It's going to just explode all at once, and that's very hard on the engine. It makes you lose power, and of course later on, if it continues, it's going to cause damage to your cylinders, your pistons, and various other components in your engine. So you want to avoid that at all costs. Looks like our oil temps are coming up nice on engine 4 and 3, and 2 and 1 are not far behind there. So our oil temp gauges are here. Oil pressure is here. It's indicating a little low. As it warms up, of course, oil thins out. So we're okay with that right now. That indication is what we expect to see. Of course, our RPM gauges are here. Engines 1 and 2 are here, 3 and 4. Manifold pressures are there. Fuel flow is right here. That'll be in pounds per hour. And then we have 4 BMEP gauges up here. That stands for brake mean effect pressure. And it's essentially a reading of the pressure inside the cylinders, and it's a good indication for how much power your engine is making. So since we got our power, or excuse me, our oil temp up there, we'll go ahead and conduct a run up here on the ramp, and then we'll taxi out to the runway. We're using runway 33 today. That is a 10,865 foot runway. Plenty of room, and it looks like we got about 6 knots of headwind there, so shouldn't be too bad of a takeoff. For a run up, bring the throttles back to idle, and we will check our reverse first. There's the reverser bar going down. Advance throttles a little bit. See the orange lights come on our prop synchronizer there. It's indicating it's in reverse, and bring them back to idle. It comes out of reverse, so we'll make sure that they go back up. There we go. That's probably the most important thing we want to check, that they do indeed come out of reverse. So we'll do the outboard engines first, up to 1500 RPM. It's back just a little bit. Do the prop cycle for those two. You can see our RPMs drop there. We'll check propeller feathering for those. So here is our left outboard starting to drop, so we'll go ahead and pull it out. And our right outboard, again dropping down there. Pop that back out. And then we'll go ahead up to about 30 inches of manifold pressure on the outboards. And we'll check the mags. A little bit of drop there in RPM. Come back to both. Right mag. There's a drop. Back to both. Drop there on our right engine. Both. Good rise. Back to the right mag. Good drop. And back to both. Check our fuel and oil pressure there for the outboard engine. So there's fuel pressure. Oil pressures are good. Temperatures looking good there. Cylinder temps are down here. also looking good. Inverters are also indicating good voltage over here. So we'll go ahead and pull those back to 1000 RPM. Usually would check the blowers as well, but since we're not going to use high blower, and I actually don't think Everett's uses high blower anymore, just to keep the wear and tear down on the engines. So we'll go ahead and, actually I'm going to go ahead and take the gust lock off just to make it easier to do our middle engines. There's this bar right here that blocks the throttles and keeps you from taking off with the gust lock engaged. So we'll go ahead and do the run up on those, and then we'll be ready to head out. Alright, so there's our run up complete. Go ahead and head out onto the runway and then do our pre-takeoff checks. Alright, so here we are at the hold short line of runway 33 here in Anchorage. I'm going to go ahead and let Jim sit down here, our flight engineer, and we're going to go ahead and utilize him for our before takeoff checks, just to make sure we don't miss anything.
Boost pumps.
Setting our boost pumps to low there.
Boost pumps on low. Fuel selector and crossfeed. Main tanks and crossfeed off. Autopilot and carb heat. Off and cold. Hydraulic system. Down, forward, pressure and quantity checked. Okay. Flaps 20. Flaps set 20. Windows and turbine. Closed and on. Controls. Gust lock released. Free. Pitometer. On. Mixture and cowl flaps. Reach unlocked. Set. Transponder. On. Landing lights. Extended and on. Before takeoff checks complete.
So there's our before takeoff checklist complete. And I was just trying to point out what he was doing as we went along. You notice here he did turn on our automatic feathering system. And what that does is if an engine fails on takeoff, it'll immediately feather that propeller in order to save us some of the trouble of having to scramble in a critical phase of flight and hopefully getting us out of a bad situation, which I'm hoping we don't need today. But regardless, that is what the automatic feathering system is supposed to do. So we'll just go ahead and check a couple things here, make sure we're all looking good. Center head temperature is looking good, oil temp's looking good, pressure's good, fuel pressure is good there. I think we're good to go. So go ahead and ease on out. Parking brake off. Come up just a little bit on the power. Seems to want to be a little sticky on the runway today. So we're lined up here on runway 33. Our rotation speed at this weight is right around 95. Our V2 is 107. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll go for 100. It's a little easier to see there on our airspeed indicator. So everything's looking good. We'll go ahead and get Jim to
Water injection.
initiate a wet takeoff. So he's turning the water injection on here. And we'll see these green lights come on.
3 inches stabilize.
You'll notice those come on in our takeoff roll. That indicates the pumps are working. So 30 inches stabilized. Check our pressures, temps. Everything's looking okay. BMPs are even. Here we
3
go.
inches stabilized.
We'll release the brakes at 40 inches.
Cowl flaps. Cowl flaps set. Full power, please. Going full power.
There's 40. Coming off the brakes. And we'll keep running our way. Water injection's coming on there. Our airspeed is alive. Engines are looking good.
Full power set.
Full power is set. There's 80. I'll start easing back on the yoke. And we're off the ground there.
Positive rate, gear up.
Positive rate gear's coming up. Keep a shallow climb going.
Gear up, lights out, flaps up. Flaps going up.
gonna gain just a little bit of speed there. We want to try to climb at 165.
Meter power set. Climb power. Setting climb power. Climb power set. After takeoff checklist, please. After takeoff checks complete.
We're climbing out nicely now. Trying to get the speed back down a little bit to 165. And coming onto our GPS course now. Looking at our needle there, keep that centered up. Going up to 9,000 feet today. Coming through 2,500 feet. Climbing nicely. We'll go ahead and kick the gyro on for our autopilot there. Let the gyro spool up. Get us back on course here. I'm surprised we're not getting an indication on nav 2 here. Leaving Anchorage behind fairly quickly, and then getting out over some rough territory. Go ahead and engage the autopilot clutches here, and that engaged nicely, keeping our 1,000 foot a minute climb. Coming through 4,000 feet now. 5,000 to go. We'll go ahead and switch this over to localizer mode, and it should turn there. Yep, going to follow our GPS course. So while we're climbing up a little bit here, we'll talk a little bit more about the DC-6 itself. The DC-6 was Douglas's first pressurized airliner. Of course, the DC-3 being unpressurized, the DC-4 was also unpressurized. The DC-5, well, they didn't make that many of them. I believe they only made one, actually, DC-5. So not many people have heard of that one. Then the DC-6 came out, it was pressurized, and it was Douglas's best airliner to date when it came out. Pretty much every major airline had them. I think United had 96 in its fleet, so it's a very popular airplane. Delta advertised it in '48 when they got theirs. There's some things that they said. They called it their Delta liner. They said none faster, none finer, to and through the South. And their little sales brochure, if you will, to advertise their new DC-6s talked about how fast it was, how comfortable it was. Typically they would fly between 10,000 and 20,000 feet. And it says where the DC-6 reels off a mile every 12 seconds at a steady pace, hour after hour. So 312 mile an hour cruise speed is what it was advertised as. And at the time of this brochure, it had the record for Miami to Chicago at 3 hours and 8 minutes, which is pretty impressive back then. Still impressive by today's standards, even. In the passenger configuration, it would have had seats for up to 80 max, but usually you're around 50 to 60 seats on board. The Delta brochure brings out that it is configured for 56 seats. And they had it's actually a very cool seating arrangement in the rear of the aircraft called the Sky Lounge. 6 seats arranged in a semicircle. So look up some pictures of that. The R2800s proved to be an excellent choice for reliability and dependability as well. Of course, the R2800 was proved during World War II. Different variations of that engine were used in several different airplanes. Of course, the Corsair, the Hellcat being a couple of those fighter aircraft that were used with great success in the Pacific Theater. And the P-47 also had the R2800. So very famous fighters that utilized that engine, proving its worth during the war there. And it proved to be a great choice in the DC-6 as well. And from what I've read, it was actually in this airplane that they discovered the issue of backloading the engine. Coming up through some clouds here. We'll keep an eye on it, make sure we don't pick up any icing. We may have to turn the prop de-icer and the airfoil de-icer on as well. So, up until the DC-6, most pilots had been flying the unpressurized DC-3 and DC-4 unpressurized bombers in World War II even. So they didn't really have experience with pressurized fast airplanes. And one airline in particular, I don't recall which one it was, but one airline had the procedure to chop the power and point the nose down fairly late in their flight, and they started having a string of master rod bearing failures and couldn't figure out why. Nobody else was having this issue. And they realized that their descent procedure was the problem. They were chopping the power, so they were letting the manifold pressure get low and keeping the props at their RPM, which let the props drive the engine. Coming up to 9,000 feet now. I'm going to go ahead and go up to 9,500 just to hopefully either get above or stay below these clouds, one of the two, and not have to worry about any mountain peaks up ahead. I personally don't want to slam into the side of a mountain. Just click a little bit nose down on our gyro pilot there, and then kick our altitude hold on just about there. That should hold us at 9,500 all the way to Fairbanks. So picking up some speed here, we'll go ahead and have Jim run our cruise checks.
Cruise power, please. Setting cruise power.
Just pulling it back. It should be around 35 inches of manifold pressure. Then he's going to pull the props back here as well.
No, it's set.
There we go. He's setting it to about 32 inches and 2300 RPM roughly, which gives us a BMEP indication of 150 PSI. And a fuel consumption, it's got an auto lean now. Fuel consumption is dropping down to about 600 pounds per hour. So we're kicking along nicely now. Fuel situation is looking good. Flying this DC-6 is a very rewarding endeavor, and there's so much going on, so many things to keep track of, and when you get it right, it feels good. Let's check our wings here. Doesn't look like we're picking up any ice there. So the propellers of the DC-6 use electric boots on the leading edge to get the ice off of them. The airfoil de-icers use what's called a hot wing. It has heaters that duct hot air through the leading edge of the wing and heats that up so that keeps the ice off there. It doesn't have any boots on it or anything of that kind. It has those heaters for the leading edge of the wing as well as for the tail airfoil surfaces. And when the DC-6 first came out, it had some issues. As with any new, really any mechanical thing, cars or airplanes, unfortunately these problems resulted in loss of life. One of those problems was the fuel vent system. The fuel vent system on the wing was dumping fuel, venting that fuel, and getting sucked into the air intake or the heater / air conditioner. And what happened on 2 flights, the first one resulted in a total loss. All on board were killed, unfortunately. But that fuel was getting sucked into the heater system, and then it ignited and caused a fire in the belly of the airplane and burned throughout all the ductwork of the heaters, which is through the entire airplane, and completely burned it to the ground, so they couldn't really figure out the cause of the fire. The second one, fortunately, they caught it in time and were able to land and get everybody off, and they were able to figure out what caused that, and that led to the relocation of the wing fuel vents to avoid that problem. The other problem is also related to fire, but it's related to the fire extinguisher system. So you have all these fire extinguisher levers across the dash here, and those are all linked to CO2 bottles, and they will discharge that CO2 into the various areas that these valves correspond to. Now, what happens if you are exposed to a lot of CO2? Well, CO2 displaces oxygen. So, if you get CO2 into the cockpit of an aircraft, you're going to have a bad time, because you're going to pass out. And if you're the pilot of an aircraft, you pass out, guess what you're not doing? You're not flying the airplane. And unfortunately, there was a flight that was on its way to, New York. And over Pennsylvania, there was a mayday call of a fire. And unfortunately, that fire alarm was a false alarm. The sensors in the baggage compartments and various other areas were prone to false alarms. And this one was a false alarm. So they pulled the fire extinguisher, and that CO2 collected in the cockpit and incapacitated the flight crew, and they ended up crashing. So they figured all this out, and unfortunately Douglas tried to cover this up. the report was stamped, do not show to anybody, or something to that effect, and stuffed in a desk drawer. It was later found and brought to light during a suit by a family member of a passenger on that flight. And all this was exposed and led to some different procedures being brought up and some different relief valves being installed in the cockpit to try to vent that CO2 and not result in the incapacitation of the flight crew. So that kind of tarnished the DC-6's reputation right there from the beginning. But after that, and after it regained popularity, it proved to be a very effective aircraft and a very well-loved aircraft. As we're flying along here, I believe what we're seeing out our left-hand window here, that should be Denali. Over there, some might call it Mount McKinley. Tallest peak in North America, just over 20,000 feet. If you haven't been there, definitely encourage you to go there. It is a phenomenal sight to see. So as we're making our way along here, I'll try to give you some nice shots of the mountains, some nice sightseeing, and we will come back to the top of the descent, talk a little bit more about some tips for calculating your descent point and little tidbits on how to land the DC-6. So we'll see you at the top of the descent. Welcome back to the cockpit of the DC-6. We've got about 58 miles to run to Fairbanks. This is why I've tuned up VOR in my nav 2, because it's so much easier to look at this than it is to come up here to the GPS, tune that page, and have to zoom in and look at it. And again, normally I fly with old school avionics because it's more challenging that way, and I like a challenge. So again, 56 miles to run now, and we want to start our descent. I'm going to start it at about 50 miles out, so here in just a few minutes. And the reason I'm doing that is because we're currently going about 5 miles a minute, roughly 300 miles an hour, and I need to get down to 2,600 feet. So for easy math, You know, we're at 9,500. We got to lose 7,000 feet just for easy math. So at 1,000 feet a minute, that means we need 7 minutes to lose that 7,000 feet. So 7 minutes times 5 miles a minute is 35 miles, and I'm adding a buffer to that. So I like to add a 10 to 15 mile buffer. So 50 miles is where we'll start our descent. Well, it looks like we're clear of the major peaks up ahead there. Fairbanks should be just out there in that haze somewhere. We're going to come in and land on runway 2, I believe it is. Yes, 2 left. So there's about 50 miles. We'll go ahead and take the altitude control off and just ease down our descent here. Well, the DC-6 is a little bit different as far as the descent compared to the DC-3. As you may have noticed in the DC-3, I like to keep 500 feet a minute in the descent and pull the power back gradually as we descend. DC-6 is a little bit different. According to the tutorial videos that the folks that made this, PMDG, put out, you want to just point the nose down at about 1,000 feet a minute, leave your cruise power set, and just go down. So that's what we're going to do. We've got about 1,000 foot a minute descent going. Leaving our cruise power in. And what I'll do is wait to run the descent checklist until after we're leveled off, or just before we're about to level off. And that's when Jim, our flight engineer, will pull back the power to 26 inches of manifold pressure. And we'll have that little bit of a buffer to slow down, because we need to go from, you know, over 300 miles an hour down to our approach speeds. Be able to put our flaps out, put our gear down, things of that nature, and then land. It's kind of important to not try to land at 300 miles an hour. This is not a space shuttle. So we're coming down nicely now. We've already gone 10 miles just in that short, or roughly 10 miles in that time we've been talking. So, very fast airplane. We'll be able to see how good I did on my calculations too. The sim is really good at showing scenery, but it just doesn't quite do Alaska justice. It's a very rugged, beautiful place to go. I would love to go back. I've been up to Anchorage and then up to Denali in the past. Love to go back, especially love to go back and fly, you know, really anything, but a DC-3 or a DC-6 would be the ultimate goal. Coming up on 38 miles to go. It's showing us at 9 minutes at our current speed, which of course that'll taper off as we get closer. I've already tuned in the localizer for the ILS here on the GPS in our nav1, and how I did that is we came up here, you select just left click to switch your selection point, and then use these knobs to tune. The outer knob tunes your smaller numbers there, you see, and then the big knob tunes your larger numbers to the left of the decimal there. And then you just hit this switch to take it from standby to your active frequency. So 109.1 is the frequency for the ILS for runway 2 left there in Fairbanks. And that's currently showing 5, let's see, oops, it's Anchorage weather. Let's go back to Fairbanks here. Fairbanks weather is showing 6 knots of headwind, 1 knot of crosswind. Runway 2 left is a 11,800 foot runway. Plenty of room for the DC-6. Went through 5,500. About 3,000 to go, roughly. Our minimum safe altitude within 25 miles is 4,400, so I might level off there. We'll go ahead and continue down. I've been in here before, and it's not too terrible on this side of Fairbanks. It's pretty flat out here on this end, actually. There's about 4,500. Our descent is slowed down a little bit, but that's okay. 800 feet a minute is still pretty respectable. And I'm going to leave it alone. If it's not broke, don't fix it. Now, you may have noticed that needle coming in there for nav 1, so our localizer is in range. Runway 2 left. So we might... Actually, let's go ahead and do that. Let's take this over to gyro pilot mode. That's just our normal wings level hold mode. And we'll come up here and hit our CDI button. Change that to VLOC mode. Let me get you up there so you can see what I'm talking about. So we switch this to GPS mode, so that's going to be following the GPS magenta line. Hit the CDI button to VLOC, and that will change this to focus on nav 1's signal there. Go ahead and initiate a slight turn to the left here. And we're about 21 miles out now, so I'm going to go ahead and call for the descent checklist.
26 inches, please.
So he's going to pull the power back, and we'll start slowing down a little bit.
Set. Descent checklist, please. Altimeters and flight instruments cross-checked. Seatbelt signs on. On. Engine blower is low. Low. Descent checks are complete.
So there's a descent checklist. I could do all that by myself. I have the checklists, but it's a lot easier to let Jim do it, and that way I don't mess anything up. I don't know why his name is Jim. It seems very fitting for a flight engineer, though. I think I can see our approach lights out there, actually. Coming up on 2,600 feet, so we'll go ahead and start leveling off. A little too much, a little too aggressive there. Come down just a little more. Yeah, we're about 15 miles out right now. Should be coming in to intercept our localizer nicely. Take our altitude hold on right quick. A little bit low. We don't need the ILS today, but it's nice to have a reference to follow. It's going to be a visual approach, but I like to utilize the tools I have to get myself lined up and make it easier on myself. So once this starts coming in, we'll go ahead and flip over to localizer again on the gyro pilot. And then once the glide slope comes in, I will go ahead and take the gyro pilot off and hand fly. You see we're slowing down pretty well. About 11 miles out now. Hopefully I planned this right. It's always a exercise in thinking ahead with these old airplanes. And I can take flaps at about 170 knots, 168 really. So I might take some flaps here. I could take 10 degrees higher than that. So we're down to about 180 right now. Go ahead and put 10 degrees of flaps in there. And our bypass lever is down, so we'll call for the in-range checks.
Turbine. Normal. Fuel booster pumps.
There's our needle coming in, switch to localizer.
Fuel tank selectors.
There's our turn.
Mains on, crossfeed off. Hydraulic bypass valve. Down. No smoking signs. On.
I really like how he does that.
Range checks complete.
It turns on the seatbelt sign when we got cargo in the back. But that's okay. Not everybody's perfect. It's okay, Jim. He did bring me coffee and cruise, so that's okay. You see we're lining up now, slowing down nicely. We're at 10 degrees of flaps. Coming down through 160. About 5.5 miles to go to the runway. There's our glide slope coming in. I'm going to go ahead and hand fly the rest of this. Kill that. Take our flaps to 20. And we'll take our before landing checks.
Setting flaps 20.
They're already set there.
20 flaps set. Mixtures rich, please. Auto rich.
Get my
Mixtures set.
throttles back in sync
Gear
here.
up and down, please. Gear up and down.
Gears coming down. Put in 30 degrees of flaps, get back on the glide slope there.
Gear down and locked. 3 greens. Routes. 2400 RPM. 2400 RPM set. Cal flaps. Plus 3 degrees. Cal flaps set. ADI. ADI off. ADI is off. Landing lights. Speed good. Extending lights. Lights extended and on. Carbine. Carbine cold. Set cold. Before landing checks complete.
Looks like we got maybe a little bit more crosswind than forecast. That's okay. Our before landing checks are complete. I'm gonna go ahead and take 40 degrees of flaps now. Try to stay on that glide slope. And this big airplane, it's better to drop flaps to maintain the glide slope than pulling the power. We're leaving our power set where it is right now, about 90 BMEP, which is around 25 inches on the manifold pressure. We're on glide slope. We got red over white on our happy lights there. So here's how it's going to look. We're going to come in over the fence VREF is 105 roughly. Take some flap out there to get back up. Got a little low. So try to come over the fence at 105-ish. And then nice gentle flare, touchdown. Once the nose wheel hits, reverse props and get her slowed down. Got 3 greens on our gear, just double checking that there. Put 40 degrees in. And we'll go full flaps. Coming in a little hot. Pull back just a little power. Ease back on the power there. A little bit of brakes. Reversers are off. Ease on in. All for after takeoff checks. Or after landing checks, excuse me. Forgot what we were doing there for a minute. That was a decent landing. A little bit off the center line, but you can't have it all.
After landing checks complete.
We'll taxi over to parking now. Laps are all coming up, everything's going good. This is why Jim's nice to have along, he does all the things for you. So we'll see you over there at the ramp. Alright, so we're here on the ramp. I believe this is actually pretty close to where Everett's hangar is at Fairbanks. So park brake come on, we'll do our parking checks. Shutting our engines down. Good shutdown on 3. Good shutdown on 4. It's a good shutdown on 1. And a good shutdown on #2 engine. Fuel tank's coming off. Shutting everything else down.
Parking checks complete, A-plan secured.
There we go. So that was a nice little flight up. Everything went well. It's been a minute since I've flown the DC-6, but didn't do too terrible. Well, that is it for this flight in the DC-6. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, let me know in the comments below.